I'd like to talk about the theme, which is making the impossible possible. And I find that interesting because I generally don't believe in impossibility myself. I think that anything with any amount of effort can actually be done, and it can be done well. And I'll come to what I believe would be a better way of putting it. In fact, even for this particular talk, I had made up my mind that I was going to get fit, lose 20 pounds. That was impossible, actually. But I'd like to come with a particular statement that I do enjoy, which is try not, do or do not. And the presumption of impossibility is taken out completely from that. Now, one of the interesting things is that was said by the great scholar Yoda, who was in Empire Strikes Back. I see you laugh, but both me and Senator Rehman Malik take his teachings very seriously. Now, I'm going to start my talk actually about something called fire in the cinema. You can imagine this particular place, and it looks pretty much like this. A cinema, you've got seats going on, and we all presume in the movies that whenever anything happens where there's a fire, everyone will panic, they'll push around, and what research actually shows is that's not the case. People are fairly orderly. In fact, it goes to great extremes. If you've ever read about bomb blasts, what happened is they set off a small charge. You would imagine everyone would go crazy and run away. Actually, terrorists know human psychology better than most social scientists. What usually happens is everyone says, yaar, dekhte hain kya hua hai. They go close, the second bomb goes off. Now, that's the one that does the damage. Now, the point to that is that there was no panic there. And in the cinema, it's the same. What you find out sometimes is in a cinema fire, that you'll find a number of people who are sitting in their seats. They've died of smoke inhalation, of poisoning. And the reason for that is they didn't panic. I can just imagine that, somebody gets up from their seat, aag lagi hui hai. And then he sits down, zara rush kam ho jaye, phir main kuch karta hu. And the thing is, when they die, the point is that the panic of flight hasn't set in. And I think that's the best example of what I want to talk about today. There's no panic about education in Pakistan. We don't escape the cinema. We don't do anything that shows how severe that particular problem is. Now, I'd like to explain why, is that we've also seen lots of research that tends to say, is you ask Pakistanis about education, they'll say it's very important. Even illiterate parents will tell you the same thing. However, one of the problems with the research is sometimes there are certain questions you ask where it's hard to say no. Somebody will call you up, hi, I'm a researcher, I want to know, do you believe in human rights? And then you'll say, okay, just give me 1 minute, I have to finish beating my servant. Then you come back and then you say, my life was dedicated to human rights. So if somebody says to you, do you believe in women's rights? Yes, 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 and it's the same with education. However, to believe in something, it means you have to be spurred to action. And that action sometimes is missing. Now, I'd like to go on and explain that, there's a priority in some ways. When we look at ourselves collectively, we find that we're interested in some things. And we will talk and be animated and demand those things. So in some ways, foreign policy, jobs, electricity, those are our desserts. They give us a sugar rush. Everyone gets excited, we fight, and we want to do something about it. Education is like tinde. You don't eat it unless you have to. And it's also the same thing is that you don't discuss it unless you have to. So the point being, to some degree, is that we can see that a lot of concerns that we have are reflected by the media in Pakistan. So to what degree does the media reflect our education problems? Well, actually, they only look at it with 2%. 2% of media time is spent on education. Out of that 2%, 60-70% is aaj metric ka result aaya, wahan ladai hui, this happened, that happened. Substantial demand for any change, like you find for electricity, for petrol prices, or even more educated discussion does not happen. So 2% is nothing. In fact, like Mira's 25th birthday gets more serious discussion than education does. Now, one of the reasons for that is that obviously we have to reprioritize. We have to think about this more seriously. So we were part of something called the Pakistan Education Task Force. Our aim for the task force is to widen access, improve quality. It's to increase efforts for a bipartisan consensus on education. Education cannot be reformed until and unless all the parties want to do it. We've got a financial crisis. Everyone needs to step in. And then again, we also wanted to change the lack of interest in education, because there is, frankly, it's not that we as a nation are not interested, we are actually despondent. We don't believe anything can happen. Now, I'd like to just go and explain one thing, is that we have to forget who's responsible. Whether it's authoritarian dictators, snake-like politicians, they've all been responsible. And you and I are responsible. We've been apathetic. So the question is not about responsibility. Let's forget that, because that's a debate that sidetracks you. What we have to care about is what we can do now. Now, I'm just going to explain is what we tried to do at the Pakistan Education Task Force. Essentially what we wanted was to make the media, highlight education, to care for 1 month, so that the level of debate and understanding can be increased, so that somewhere along the line, more pressure can be exerted. Too many politicians are on talk shows all the time. If you educate a talk show host, if you've got a writer that they're reading about, the chance that it might translate into something they're more aware of may happen. There are better ways of doing it. This is the one way we wanted to do it. So we decided that we'd have a March for Education, 3.5 weeks in the month of March. We would pull out all stops to make sure there would be coverage and an understanding of education. And we declared rather pompously that there was an education emergency in the country. And what we did in that context was trying to get people to understand that how bad the situation is. And what we wanted was that the education debate needs to be reframed. It has to be restarted. We have to have more in 1 month on education than has been done in the past 2 years. We need to reach the policymakers, we need to reach the politicians, we need to reach the media. And through all of this, what we hope is that the education problem is not seen as a problem, but as an emergency. Like the fire I told you about, we need to panic. Now, what I'll show to you is the degree of how bad things really are. So the first thing is, why are we apathetic? Why don't we care? Well, it's almost something that you can sympathize with. First, we think we're too poor. Education's a luxury, we can't afford it. The second thing is that too much time has passed. Sometimes the problem is so intractable, just forget about it. We might as well concentrate on something else, and nothing can be done now. And the third thing, to a degree, is that the economy, security, these things take precedence, so then once we solve these, we'll come to education. We're saying, no, you have to do it simultaneously. Now, how we looked at it is trying to get certain ideas out to which some degree people have had a bigger awareness of. About us being too poor, well, you have to look at it this way, is that the economic cost of not educating Pakistan is the equivalent of having a flood every year. So much time was devoted to the human tragedy of the flood. But the same is happening every year, but nobody notices, the same economic cost. Secondly, it's the equivalent of doubling, well, actually increasing our exports by 50%. Now, that's the economic cost. Then, the other thing that we need to look at and sort of understand is that determined efforts can show results in 2 years. What this really means is, if we increase the budget to where it was 5 years ago, we can have results in 2 years. We don't have to wait, for a lifetime to see those results. Now, I'd like to point out that there are 26 countries poorer than Pakistan with a better record in education. That means they're more serious. It's not the money. It's what they've decided is the priority that they should have for their country. And that's one thing that we need to get in mind, is that when we say we're too poor, it can't be done, well, you have to look at 26 countries and you can learn from those 26 countries. I don't know if you ever remember Arshad Mahmood's joke on PTV in the old days, Uganda. He used to say that all the time when he was talking about Uganda, the country. Well, out of those 26 countries, Uganda is doing better than we are, and with less money. Now, as I go forward, I'd like to explain that we spend more money on subsidies to get cheap airline tickets for PIA, we give to Pepco and Pakistan Steel, than the 1.5% needed for the worst education crisis hit parts of this country. So it's a question again, we don't have money, or is it the choice we're making? Now, again, what I'd like to tell you all pretty emphatically None of you in this room will live to see a Pakistan with universal education. You'll be dead if nothing is changed about this. So this crisis will outlast our lifetimes if we don't change what we're doing. Now, again, you'll be also shocked is that sending a kid to school can actually kill him. 30,000 buildings are in such a dangerous condition that they could kill the kids who go there. Now, I'm just going to sidetrack into a story I wanted to tell. It's about this young boy who was in Pindi, and after a lifetime of dreaming and hoping it would happen, he finally got a girl to go out with him. So he decided that, okay, I'll take her to Islamabad, we'll get some ice cream. And so he took her to ice cream, they got some ice cream, he's going back in the car, and he decides, okay, let me test my luck. So what he meant by that, of course, was that he slowly put his hand on her knee. And he's now quiet, he's afraid, what will happen? So she looks at him and she says, you can go further if you want. So he drives her to Multan. Now, why I have a problem with that story is because Multan is the Prime Minister's home district. It's in a place which has, Punjab, which has better education than the rest of the country. In his home district, out of every 100 girls who enter primary school, only 2 will go on to higher secondary school. So that, again, just shows you that even when you have power, there's a degree where, if people were demanding it more, or if there was more pressure, where somebody who can get the state machinery rolling, it's not happening. Now, I do want to say is that I don't want to alarm all of you. There is some good news. There are low-cost private schools. They're providing education cheaper than what the government of Pakistan does, and at a better quality. The teachers actually show up. They manage to get some degree of schooling done. Then, at the same time, what I'd like to talk about is the Punjab Education Foundation. They've set it up. They've got more children in school, about 850 to 900,000, which is more children in school than Switzerland, actually, at a much higher level of education than the government is providing, at a level where they're intervening to make sure kids go to school who wouldn't otherwise go to school, and year on year, the results are improving. If a school doesn't improve, they withdraw the funding. So it shows that even the amount we're spending now can yield much better results, because we do get kids in school, but over the long run, they drop out or they're functionally illiterate. Some surveys actually show that schooling has no benefit. People who've never been to school can read as well as somebody who went through a couple of years of school in a Pakistani government system. So that just shows to you how intractable and how difficult the problem is at some level. Now, the results that we had for at least our particular initiative, we had more than 150 deep articles where the press kept writing about this. And we looked at where the papers were, so whether it was Nation Nawai Waqt, whether it was the News, whether it was Express Tribune, we were trying to get out to people hoping that they would sign our petition so that we could give it to the government, but at the same time we were also hoping that whatever access they had, that they would be better informed, that they will be able to do something as influencers in the future. Then we had more than 30 TV programs. They were top hosts, they were all doing their best. We had radio stations putting out the message, and we got more than 170,000 people to sign a petition demanding more for education. Now, this was, at least we are hoping, 3.5 weeks. You'll all remember, maybe this talk will help with a little here or there. But the most important thing I saw personally is that I did find people were at least more concerned, and especially in the media. Now, what is important to know is that we paid for none of this. The media did it for free. They got concerned, whether you look at the left of the spectrum in terms of certain anchors or the right. They all wanted to pull in time and they wanted to do it. In some ways, I'll be honest with you, I was not the best person to lead on the communications for this, because I'm personally a bit of a divisive figure in the media. Because I write columns, regarding the media. Sometimes I take names, they don't like it. And So what I want to show is a particular case that I found very heartwarming. I'm going to put up pictures of 3 media people, including myself, and explain how that process went. So the first is me, which is, some of you will understand this. But the first is me, and then is Hamid Mir. Now, with Hamid Mir, just weeks ago, I had a very bad exchange on email, where he was unhappy with stuff I had been saying, obviously, about him. And it was an uncomfortable thing. But then I wrote, and it was rather shameless of me, I said, this is what we're doing, can you help? He wrote back, he says, I don't care who you are. If you want to do something on education, you're a friend of mine. And he got leaders on his TV program, he got the PMLN publicly to make a promise that they would make sure, or try to make sure, that the education budget is not cut this year. Then again, somebody I disagree with is Talat Hussain. Again, when I approached him, no questions asked. Whatever our politics is, and I'm happy to show that, we Pakistanis can agree, and there are areas where we all agree that we need to do something for our country. What he did was he was ready to go to any school. He did programs highlighting the information. He was willing to get anyone on just to make sure we could achieve something. The results of that were fairly limited, but what didn't happen is we intended was after the 18th Amendment, where every province would now take care of education, we wanted a TV program where all the chief ministers would come. We would say, here's 170,000 people, they want you to do more, this is your new responsibility, tell us what you're going to do. The sad thing is, only Shehbaz Sharif was excited. That program didn't happen. That petition has not been delivered. Anyhow, we hope that we will at some point in the future be able to do something about this. Now the question is, for you, what can be done? Well, I'll suggest you have to eat more tinde. And that means this is not exciting. This is not as fancy as discussing some foreign policy issue or corruption, but this is critically important. The more you discuss it, the more the chance something will happen. Also, you have to engage with the political process. You have to vote. That's how your voice actually gets heard. So, I'm going to try and quickly come to the end of this, and I'm conscious I've got half a minute, but what I'll try and say is that I'll tell you one more story that I really like. And this will be the end of what the speech is about. There was once a guy in a village, he came back, he had done his PhD in deductive logic. And he met one of his friends who wasn't educated. So his friend asked him, what have you done? What is this PhD? He says, it's in logic, but you're not very educated, you won't understand. He says, no, I will, tell me. So he says, okay, I'll explain it this way. Do you have a dog? So he said, yes. If you have a dog, that means you have a good lawn so he can run around and play. And he says, yes. Then he says, if you have a big lawn, it only goes to show that you must have a big house. He said, yes. And if you have a big house, it means you're wealthy. He said, yes. Then it means that your mother must have prayed a lot for you. He said, yes. And if your mother prayed a lot for you, that means that, she's a good woman. He was very impressed. He was going home. Another one of his friends who wasn't that educated, he says, why are you so happy? I learned what deductive logic is. The guy says, but you tell me. He says, no, you don't know. He says, you're as ill-educated as me. Tell me. So he says, fine. Do you have a dog? And he says, no. So his mother was of bad character because of this. So my point being is I think it's only logical that we do more for education in Pakistan. Thank you.